I picked up the phone with the kind of hope only a mother carries. My hands trembled a little, but my heart was light. My son Daniel was supposed to be planning the happiest day of his life, and I imagined myself there sitting in the front row, tears of pride in my eyes. But the voice that answered me did not carry joy. It carried ice. "We got married last week," Sophia said, her tone sharp, her words deliberate. "We only invited those who deserved to be there." Deserved. The word cracked through me like a whip. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, certain I had misheard. But Daniel's silence on the other end told me it was no mistake. For 3 years I had kept them afloat. Month after month I paid the rent for their downtown apartment. I bought the furniture, they lounged on the bed, they slept in the refrigerator, they opened each morning. When they were sick, I was the one who rushed to the pharmacy. When the holidays came, I wrapped the gifts and filled the table. And now, when my only son finally took his vows, I was not even worth a seat in the room. The pale blue dress I had bought for the occasion still hung in my closet tags untouched, as if mocking me. I had imagined myself in the photos standing beside my son, my hand on his arm. But those photos existed, and I was not in a single one of them. Sophia had posted them all. Her parents smiling beside her, her siblings toasting with champagne. I had even recognized the veil, the very one I had helped her pay for. A veil I would only ever see through the glass of a screen. Tell me, if your own child married and told you that you did not deserve to be there, would your heart survive such a wound? I sank into the chair by my kitchen table, the same table where I had counted every dollar, stretched every bill, convinced myself that my sacrifices were building a bridge to a stronger family. But that bridge had collapsed into ashes. I had been the silent provider, the mother who never asked for anything in return. I gave and gave and gave until giving became my identity. Rent, food, gifts, medical emergencies, it all poured out of me like water from a broken faucet. When my husband passed, I thought the best way to honor his memory was to protect Daniel's future. I sold a small piece of land my husband and I had planned to retire on. The money that should have given me peace in old age went straight into Daniel and Sophia's hands. The figures haunted me. $500 a month for rent, $200 for food, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, each one padded with gifts, a car loan I knew would never be repaid. By the time I sat down with my bank statements, the total reached nearly $40,000. $40,000 from my husband's sweat, from my retirement, from the nest egg I had carefully built penny by penny. And still I was told I did not deserve a chair at my son's wedding. That night I could not sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, asking myself where I had gone wrong. I had believed that love could be purchased with sacrifice, that if I just gave enough, poured enough of myself into their lives, they would never let me go. But in that moment it became clear, they had never seen my love as love. They had seen it as a resource, a never-ending account they could draw from. I remembered the nights I ate plain rice and beans so that Daniel and Sophia could have steak on their plates. I remembered delaying my own doctor visits so Sophia's medical bills would be covered. I remembered standing in line at the bank, exhausted but determined, transferring rent money at the very last minute so they would never know what it felt like to face eviction. Each memory was not warm. It was bitter. It was a tally of my own disappearance. And then, as if fate wanted to hammer the point home, the phone rang again. Sophia's voice was no longer sharp. It was sweet, almost trembling. "Elizabeth," she said, "the rent is late this month. The landlord is threatening to evict us. Could you please transfer the money today?" I sat there in silence, the phone pressed to my ear. For years I had answered that call without hesitation. I had raced to the bank, rearranged my own plans, swallowed my own needs. But not this time. I took a slow breath, steady and calm, even as my hands shook. "Sophia," I said, "I warned you once. I only help people who are worthy. And right now, that is not you." The silence on the other end was deeper than any I had ever known. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my chest. For the first time in years, it was not me who trembled. It was her. "Elizabeth, I don't understand," she stammered. "We've always been special to you. You've always said I was like a daughter." Her words dripped with the same false sweetness I had heard so many times before. The same voice she had used to ask for money for the wedding dress, for the honeymoon, for the rings, for every whim, every excuse, every demand. But this time I did not bend. I closed my eyes and let her words fall away like ash. Have you ever reached the point where the begging no longer touches you, where the same voices that once controlled you suddenly sound hollow? That night when I finally hung up the phone, I did not cry tears of sadness. I cried tears of anger, of release, of something breaking open inside me. The woman who had once believed love had to be bought was gone, and in her place a new woman was awakening. When the line finally went dead, I sat alone in my kitchen. The house was silent, but inside me a storm raged. I thought of every dollar, every hour, every tear I had given. The number carved itself into my mind like a cruel monument, 40,000. 40,000 that should have been my safety, my peace, my chance at a quiet old age. Instead, it had built them a life where I was invisible. I pressed my palms flat against the table. The wood was worn from years of use, but tonight it felt like an anchor holding me steady. For the first time in years, I was not waiting for Daniel to call. I was not hoping Sophia would visit with a smile. I was not rearranging my life around theirs. I was still. And in that stillness, something shifted. I looked at the mirror in the hallway as I passed by. The face looking back at me was lined with years of sacrifice, but behind the wrinkles was a new hardness, a new resolve. My eyes tired as they were carried a spark I had not seen in decades. I was no longer the woman who gave until there was nothing left. I was the woman who had finally remembered she mattered too. The next morning I brewed a pot of coffee. The smell filled the house, warm and familiar. But this time I did not think of pouring a second cup for Daniel. I did not think of saving the last slice of bread for Sophia. I thought only of myself. Do you know what that feels like after years of disappearing into the needs of others? To wake up and realize you are still here, that you can choose yourself. I sat down with my checkbook, my statements, my pen. The numbers told the story of my foolishness, but they also told me something else. They told me I still had enough to live, enough to rebuild, enough to start over. It was not too late. My heart was heavy, but it was also alive. And that was enough to take the first step. I want to ask you this. If you were in my place after giving, and giving until there was nothing left, would you finally say no? Tell me in the comments. Your voice matters, and I want to hear it. Because my story was only beginning. The morning after that phone call, I opened my laptop. I should not have done it, but some part of me needed proof, needed to see what my heart already knew. And there they were. The wedding photos. Sophia stood in white radiant, her smile wide and triumphant. Daniel was at her side, his arm looped proudly through hers. Around them were faces lit with laughter, glasses raised in celebration. Her parents, her siblings, their friends, everyone but me. Photo after photo scrolled before my eyes. I had helped pay for the dress she wore, the flowers she held, the rings they exchanged. My money was stitched into every detail, but my presence was erased as if I had never existed. I pressed my hand against the screen, foolishly reaching for my son's face, the boy I had once rocked to sleep, the boy who had whispered, "I love you, Mom." But the man in those photos did not look for me. He did not even notice I was gone. A coldness spread through me. Not the cold of a winter's night, but the cold of betrayal, of realizing you have poured your soul into a well that has no bottom. I shut the laptop, but the images burned into me. They would not leave. Tell me, if you saw your child's wedding and discovered you were erased from the pictures, how would your heart endure it? I stood at the window for a long time, staring at the quiet street outside. Children played in the distance, their laughter carried on the wind. And I thought to myself, once upon a time my son's laughter had been the music of my life, but now even his happiest day had no place for me. That evening I opened my closet. The pale blue dress still hung there, wrapped in its plastic cover, untouched. I had bought it months ago, imagining how proud I would feel wearing it on Daniel's wedding day. I had even chosen shoes to match, simple but elegant, so I would not embarrass him in front of his friends. Now the dress mocked me. It was nothing more than a costume for a play in which I was never given a part. I ran my hand over the fabric, soft and smooth, and for a moment I could almost hear the sound of my husband's voice, long gone now. "You're doing too much, Elizabeth," he had once warned me. "You have to save something for yourself." But I had not listened. I had believed that giving everything would secure Daniel's love forever. Instead, it had made me disposable. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the shoes resting at my feet like two silent witnesses to my foolish hope. The tears that came were not gentle. They tore out of me, hot and angry, spilling down my cheeks in waves I could not control. I wept not only for the wedding I had been excluded from, but for every moment I had excused their coldness, every time I had silenced my own needs, every dollar I had given in exchange for scraps of affection. And as I wept, something else rose inside me. Not weakness, not despair, but fury. I whispered into the empty room, "I am not invisible. I am not worthless. The sound of my own voice startled me. It was strong, louder than I expected, carrying a conviction I had not heard in years. I wiped my face, and when I looked again at the dress, I no longer saw beauty. I saw chains. Have you ever realized that the things you thought would bring you joy were actually the very things that kept you trapped? That night I folded the dress back into its bag and shoved it deep into the back of the closet. I would not look at it again. The images of the wedding haunted me, but the fury burned hotter. And from that fire a decision began to take shape. The next day I forced myself to step outside. The air was crisp, the kind that carries both chill and promise. I walked through the park where I used to take Daniel when he was a boy. I could still picture him running ahead, his laughter echoing through the trees, his small hand reaching back for mine. But now the memory carried a bitter edge. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who could marry without me, who could look into my eyes and let his wife say I was not worthy. I stopped at a bench and sat down, my body heavy with grief. The sound of children playing nearby was both comforting and cruel. Once I had been at the center of that joy. Now I was only a spectator. The weight of it pressed on me until I thought I might break. But then something shifted. Perhaps it was the way the sunlight filtered through the leaves, or the way the breeze carried the smell of earth and life. For the first time I understood that my story was not over. I had been erased from their celebration, but I was still here. I still had breath in my lungs, strength in my hands, and a will that had not yet been crushed. And in that moment I made a promise to myself. I would no longer be the woman who gave until she disappeared. I would no longer beg for scraps of love. I would no longer buy a place in the lives of people who treated me as nothing. I would choose myself. My heart was still broken, yes, but inside that break, a seed had been planted, a seed of resolve, a seed of change. Tell me, if you were in my place, would you keep forgiving, or would you finally say enough? Write your answer in the comments. I want to know if you too have ever faced that choice. Because what came next would change everything. The morning sun poured through my curtains, thin and pale, as if even the light itself hesitated to touch me. I sat at the edge of my bed with my coffee cooling in my hands, and I whispered into the quiet. Today, I choose me. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but powerful. I dressed slowly, each button, each step deliberate, as though I were putting on armor. My purse hung heavy on my arm, and with each stride toward the bank, my heart pounded against my ribs. The sliding glass doors opened their soft hiss, greeting me like a warning. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and freshly printed paper. The faint sound of keyboards and the occasional murmur of voices blended into a steady hum. I had walked through those doors countless times, always with urgency, always with fear that if I delayed, Daniel and Sophia would lose their apartment or go without food. But today I was not here to save them. I was here to save myself. Miss? Howard, the branch manager, looked up as I approached. Her smile was polite, practiced. She had seen me so many times before, and I wondered if she recognized the rhythm of my life in the pattern of my transfers. Good morning, Mrs. Carter, she said warmly. What can I do for you today? Another transfer, I drew in a breath, my fingers tightening around my purse strap. No, I'm here to cancel them, all of them. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. All of them? Yes, I said. My voice shook at first, but I steadied it. For 3 years I've sent money like clockwork, rent, food, emergencies. But I've realized something. I wasn't giving out of love. I was giving out of fear. Fear that if I stopped, I'd lose them. But fear is not love. For the first time, Miss Howard's professional mask slipped. Her gaze softened and she leaned closer. You're not alone, you know. I've seen many parents come here empty their savings for children who never say thank you. Generosity should be a gift, not a chain. Her words hit me like a truth I had always known, but never dared to speak. Chains. That was exactly what I had been wearing. The papers slid across her desk. My name printed at the bottom of each page, waiting for my signature. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled not with doubt, but with the weight of release. The first signature dragged across the page like a blade slicing through years of silence. By the second, my hand steadied. By the third, a strange calm spread through me. With each stroke of ink, I felt the weight on my chest loosen, as if iron chains were snapping one by one. When I placed the pen down, Miss Howard gathered the forms with a quiet nod. It's done, she said softly. No more transfers will leave this account unless you choose it. Her words echoed in my mind, unless you choose it. Choice. A word I had not claimed in far too long. I left the bank with the papers folded neatly in my purse. The autumn air bit at my cheeks crisp and sharp, but instead of flinching, I welcomed it. Each breath felt like freedom rushing into my lungs. On the way home, I passed the small cafe Daniel used to love when he was a boy. I could see him at 8 years old, grinning with chocolate smeared across his lips, asking for one more cookie. The memory hit me with both sweetness and ache. Somewhere along the years that boy had disappeared, replaced by a man who measured my worth in dollars. I reached my house and paused at the door. The lock glinted in the sunlight, old and worn, a silent witness to every time I had let them in without question. I dug into my bag and pulled out the box of new locks I had bought that morning. As I laid the tools out, my hands shook again, but this time it was not fear, it was resolve. Each turn of the screwdriver scraped loudly against metal, echoing through the hallway like a declaration. When the final piece clicked into place, I pressed my hand against the door. "This is mine," I whispered. "My home, my life." I walked slowly through each room, seeing my home with new eyes. The kitchen table where I had once stacked Daniel's overdue bills now stood bare, its surface polished and waiting for my own plans. The sofa where Sophia sprawled with her phone, barely acknowledging me, was empty. The silence around me was thick, but it did not feel like abandonment. It felt like release. I moved to the window, the afternoon sun spilling across the floor. Outside, the neighborhood bustled with quiet life, children riding bicycles, a neighbor trimming her roses. For years I had hurried past these simple moments, consumed with Daniel's crises, Sophia's emergencies, the constant urgency of keeping them afloat. Now, for the first time in years, I paused and let the view soak in. Have you ever discovered that silence once feared can taste sweeter than company that drains you? That evening I pulled out a notebook I had bought long ago but never opened. My pen hovered over the first page, uncertain. What does a woman write when she has forgotten herself? Slowly, I began to list the pieces of me I had abandoned, books I had put aside, like the novel my husband and I once read together each night. The piano in the corner, its keys gathering dust, waiting for a melody. The roses in the backyard now wilted that once bloomed under my care. Small dreams, too, joining the library book club, visiting the Oregon coast again, writing letters to my sister Lydia in Chicago. As the ink flowed, so did my breath. Each line was not just a list, but a declaration. I still existed. I still had desires, hopes, a life worth living. By the time I closed the notebook, the weight on my chest had shifted. It was still heavy, but now it carried something new, possibility. The next morning I made one more call. By the afternoon, a security van pulled into my driveway. 2 men unloaded cameras, wires, and monitors, their voices calm and efficient. I watched as they mounted the small black eyes above my doors and windows, each one a silent sentinel. When the system flickered to life, I felt a sting in my chest. Sadness because I had never imagined protecting myself from my own son. Relief because now finally I was not defenseless. That night I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The screen on the wall glowed faintly, showing the quiet street outside. No footsteps on my porch, no car I recognized. Just silence wrapping itself around me like a cloak. And for the first time in years, I did not wait for Daniel's call. I did not brace myself for Sophia's demands. I let the silence stay, and I realized it was not emptiness, it was peace. The decision was final. The lifeline was cut. I had closed one chapter, and though fear whispered at the edges of my mind, I knew this truth: I could never go back. Tell me, if you were in my place, could you sever that tie? Could you look at your own child and say, "No more"? Write your answer in the comments. Your voice matters, and someone listening tonight may need your courage. Because this was only the beginning. The real battle had not yet arrived, and when it did, it would not come through a phone call. It would arrive with a knock at my door. The knock came on a gray afternoon, heavy and sharp against my door. I froze, the sound vibrating through the walls, sinking into my chest. My heart told me before my eyes did who it was. I opened the door to see Daniel, his shoulders stiff, his eyes avoiding mine. Beside him stood Sophia, her lips pressed into a tight line, and next to her a man in a gray suit carrying a leather briefcase, a lawyer. "Mom," Daniel began, his tone strangely formal, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, though every bone in me screamed not to. They walked in as though they owned the place. Sophia scanning the living room with the same contempt I had seen in her smile that day on the phone. The lawyer set his briefcase on my dining table, the table where I had once laid out birthday cakes, holiday dinners, and stacks of rent money for them. He opened it with a snap that echoed like a gunshot. "Mrs. Carter," he said smoothly, "your son and his wife are concerned about your well-being. They believe it would be best if you allowed them to manage your finances. Temporarily, of course. Temporarily. The word curled in my stomach like poison. Sophia slid a folder toward me, her voice suddenly sweet. It's just paperwork, Elizabeth. You don't need to worry. We'll handle everything for you. You've been under so much stress. I looked at Daniel, searching for the boy I had once known, the boy who used to curl up in my lap when thunderstorms frightened him, but his eyes were cold, his jaw tight. He was not here to protect me. He was here to strip me. I sat down slowly, my chair scraping against the floor, the sound sharp in the tense silence. The lawyer slid the papers across the table, his eyes calm, professional, detached, as if this was nothing more than business. But to me, it was an ambush. Sophia leaned forward, her manicured finger tapping the page. All you have to do is sign here, Elizabeth. This way you won't have to worry about bills or mistakes or confusion. We'll make sure everything is taken care of. Her tone dripped with honey, but her eyes glimmered with hunger. I let my gaze fall on the papers. Legal terms blurred together, power of attorney, guardianship, financial management. My pulse roared in my ears. Every instinct screamed that once my name touched that line, I would lose everything. Not just money, my dignity, my freedom, my very self. I pushed the folder back across the table. No. Daniel stiffened, his jaw tightening. Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. We're only trying to help you. Help me, I said, my voice sharp enough to cut the air. By stealing from me. By treating me like a child who can't tell right from wrong. The lawyer raised a hand as if calming a storm. Mrs. Carter, please. Your son and his wife are acting out of concern. At your age, it's normal to struggle with complex decisions. Age, concern, confusion. Words twisted into chains meant to bind me. I rose from my chair, my hand steady against the table. Listen carefully. I may be 71, but my mind is clear. My accounts are mine. My life is mine. And I will not hand it over to anyone. Sophia's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of anger she could not hide. Daniel's voice rose sharper, now stripped of politeness. You don't know what you're saying, Mom. You forget things. You get confused. It's not safe for you to handle this alone. I turned to him slowly, my heart breaking even as anger surged. Do you really believe that, or is that what she told you to say? His eyes flickered toward Sophia just for a second, but it was enough. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, filled with all the words he would not admit. Sophia slammed her hand on the table. We've done everything for you, Elizabeth. Do you think anyone else would put up with your stubbornness? We've sacrificed too, you know. Her words struck me like blows, but instead of wounding, they hardened me. Sacrificed. What had she given except demands wrapped in smiles, bills disguised as emergencies, manipulation masked as care? I straightened, feeling the strength in my spine. No. You've taken. You've drained. You've treated me like a bank, not a mother. The lawyer cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. His pen tapped against the folder, but no one reached for it anymore. The performance was unraveling. Daniel rubbed his forehead, his voice lower, now pleading. Mom, if you don't sign, you'll regret it. We're just trying to protect you from yourself. I looked at him, the boy I had raised, the man standing before me, and I saw the truth at last. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting his comfort, his lifestyle, the life I had built for him with my sacrifices. And in that moment I felt something fierce rise inside me, a fire I thought had long gone cold. The air between us thickened until I could barely breathe. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his voice dropping to a tone I barely recognized. Mom, don't force us to take this further. If you won't sign willingly, we'll have to explore other options. Sophia's eyes gleamed. She wanted me cornered. She wanted me afraid, but I was no longer the woman who bowed under their demands. I straightened my back, my voice cutting clear through the room. If you think you can bully me in my own home, you are mistaken. I will not sign. I will never sign. The lawyer closed his briefcase with a snap, frustration flickering across his face. Very well, Mrs. Carter, but I must warn you this could get messy. Messy, as if my life had not already been torn apart. Sophia stood her chair, scraping harshly against the floor. You'll regret this, Elizabeth. Don't forget you need us more than we need you. I rose too, meeting her glare head on. No. You've taken from me long enough. I don't need you. Not anymore. For a moment the room went silent, the only sound the pounding of my own heartbeat. Daniel's eyes darted away, shame flickering before he followed his wife toward the door. They left without another word, but the slam of the door shook the house. I stood alone in the stillness, trembling yet stronger than ever. They thought they had broken me, but all they had done was awaken a fire I would not let die. Tell me if you were in my shoes. Would you have had the strength to stand your ground, or would you have signed to keep the peace? Write your answer in the comments. Your voice matters. Because their fight was not over. And I knew deep in my bones their next attack would not be a conversation. It would be war. 2 weeks passed in uneasy quiet. I watered my roses, dusted the piano, even joined the library's afternoon book club. On the surface, life seemed steady again. But inside, I felt the tension building like the air before a storm. The storm arrived on a Tuesday morning. A knock came at the door, sharp and official. When I opened it, 2 strangers stood on my porch. One carried a clipboard, the other wore a badge around her neck. "Mrs. Carter," the woman asked. "I'm Miss Ortega from Adult Protective Services. We've received a report about concerns for your safety and mental capacity. We need to conduct a wellness check." The words struck me like ice water. Mental capacity. Safety. Someone had accused me of being unable to care for myself. Behind her, I thought I saw a car idling at the corner of the street. A silhouette in the passenger seat, Sophia watching. My stomach tightened. I stepped aside, my voice calm, though my hands shook. "Of course. Come in." They walked through my home, their eyes scanning everything. The medicine bottles on the counter, the bills stacked neatly in a drawer, the security cameras glowing faintly on the wall. They asked questions. What day was it? Who was the president? Could I recite my address? I answered each one steady, unflinching, though my heart thundered. Then came the cruelest moment. "Mrs. Carter, Miss Ortega said gently, your son and his wife expressed concern that you may be experiencing confusion, even memory loss. They're worried you might be mismanaging your finances." My throat tightened. Concern. They dared to disguise their greed as love. I met her gaze, letting the steel in my voice carry the truth. My mind is clear. My finances are in order. And the only confusion here is why the people who owe me gratitude have chosen betrayal instead. Miss Ortega's assistant scribbled notes, his pen scratching against the clipboard. Every sound made me feel as though I were on trial inside my own home. I guided them to the living room, gesturing toward the shelves, where my bank statements were neatly organized in binders. If you want proof, here it is. Every transfer, every receipt, every canceled payment. I know where every penny has gone. Does that sound like confusion to you? She flipped through the pages slowly, her brow furrowing, then relaxing. These are meticulous. Yes, I said firmly, because I had to be. I was keeping 2 adults afloat while they lived off my sacrifices. That is not confusion, that is clarity. For a moment, the room stilled. Even Miss Ortega seemed uncomfortable, as though she had walked into something deeper than her clipboard could measure. Then she cleared her throat. "We'll need to follow procedure. A medical evaluation may be requested by the court just to be thorough. It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. But it was. Every word, every step of this so-called procedure was personal. It was my son and his wife using the law to brand me unfit. I clasped my hands together, forcing myself to remain steady. You do what you must. I have nothing to hide. When they left, the silence of the house returned heavier than before. I stood at the window, watching the car at the corner pull away. I caught a glimpse of Sophia's face, satisfied like a predator who believed she had cornered her prey. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from rage. Have you ever felt the sting of being betrayed twice, once by family and again by the very system meant to protect you? That evening I called Noah Collins, the lawyer who had once helped a friend of mine during a family dispute. His voice on the other end was calm, steady, like a rope thrown to someone drowning. "Noah," I said, trying to keep my voice from breaking, "they're trying to paint me as incapable. They've reported me to Adult Protective Services. I know this is just the beginning." He listened in silence, then spoke with conviction. "Elizabeth, what you're describing is elder financial abuse. It's far more common than most people realize. But the law is not blind if you have the right evidence. Keep every document, every receipt, every recording. Do not engage with them alone, and do not be afraid. You are not weak." His words settled into me like stone building a wall where my fear had carved cracks. The next day I went through every drawer, every box, pulling out records I had kept for years. Bank transfers, hospital bills, car payments, all of it went into a large binder. Page after page, my story took shape. Not of confusion, but of relentless sacrifice. When I looked at the stack of papers, I realized something important. They thought they could erase me by twisting the truth. But the truth was there in ink, undeniable, written in numbers that would not lie. Still, the humiliation lingered. The idea that strangers had walked through my home testing me as if I were a child. The thought that my own son had fed those lies. I sat by the piano that night, my fingers brushing the keys. The sound was brittle, almost hesitant. But then I pressed harder, and a note rang out clear and strong. So was I. A week later, the letter came. A crisp white envelope stamped with the county seal demanding my presence for a medical evaluation. My hands trembled as I held it, but not from weakness, from fury. They wanted to strip me of my voice, to reduce me to a diagnosis. They wanted a doctor's note to say I was no longer myself. I set the letter down and stared at it until the edges blurred. Then I reached for my binder, heavy with evidence, and laid it on top of the envelope. Paper against paper. Their lies against my truth. I whispered to the empty room. You will not erase me. That night I barely slept. Images spun in my mind, Sophia's satisfied smirk in the car, Daniel's cold eyes, the strangers scribbling notes in my living room. Each memory carved deeper into me, not as wounds but as fuel. By dawn I felt it, the shift inside me. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled me. In its place burned something sharper, resolve. I poured my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my notebook again. This time I did not write dreams. I wrote strategies. Noah's number circled at the top. Appointments to schedule, witnesses to call, documents to copy. Every step a weapon in the war I had never asked for but could no longer avoid. Tell me, if your own child tried to prove you unfit to live your own life, would you bow your head or would you fight back? Share your answer in the comments. Someone out there may need your courage tonight. Because I knew this was only the beginning. And the battleground was already shifting from my home to the courtroom. The courthouse letter lay on my table like a threat, its official seal pressing down on me harder than any weight I had ever carried. But beside it sat my binder, thick with documents, a silent reminder that I was not defenseless. The next morning I met Noah at his office. His walls were lined with law books, their spines worn from years of battles. He listened as I spread the papers across his desk, bank transfers, receipts canceled, checks, hospital bills. He flipped through them carefully, his brows knitting, then lifting. Elizabeth, he said, this is exactly what we need. A clear record. Evidence that you managed everything, not out of confusion, but with precision. It shows competence. His words steadied me. Competence, a word they wanted to steal from me, but Noah was thorough. We'll need more than documents. Character witnesses. People who can speak to your independence, your clarity. A doctor's evaluation, not theirs, but ours. We'll control the narrative before they twist it further. The thought of sitting in a doctor's office being tested like a child made my stomach turn. But I nodded. If that's what it takes. That week, I scheduled the appointment. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and faint lavender. Dr. Myers, a man with kind eyes, guided me through questions and tasks, reciting numbers backward, recalling short lists, drawing a clock face. I completed each one steady and certain, my heart pounding with every answer. When he finished, he smiled. Your results are excellent, Mrs. Carter. Your cognitive function is above average for your age. You're sharp. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I left the office clutching the signed evaluation relief, flooding me. It was more than a paper. It was a shield. When I returned home, I placed the evaluation on top of my binder, a fresh layer of armor. For a long moment, I stood staring at the stack of papers, the story of my life told not in memories, but in numbers and signatures. They wanted proof. I would give them proof. But Noah had been right. I would need more than papers. I needed voices. I called Eleanor Brooks, my neighbor of 15 years. She had seen me gardening at dawn, carrying groceries alone, walking to church every Sunday. When I told her what Daniel and Sophia were trying to do, her gasp crackled through the phone. Elizabeth, that's outrageous. You're sharper than half the people I know. I'll testify whatever you need. Her promise warmed me, but it also deepened the ache inside. It should have been my son defending me, not my neighbor. Later that week, I stopped at the pharmacy. Dr. Patel, the pharmacist, looked up as I entered. His smile faded when I explained. Sophia asked me months ago to sign a form about your medications, he admitted quietly. She implied you were confused, that you mixed up prescriptions. I signed without thinking. But I regret it. I'll write a corrected statement. I know you're capable. His words cut me, yet they also gave me hope. Even their manipulation could unravel when the truth was spoken aloud. That night I sat in my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I thought of Daniel as a boy, bringing me wilted daisies from the yard, his eyes bright with love. How had we reached this point where a stranger's testimony mattered more than my son's faith? Have you ever felt the pain of realizing that outsiders see your worth more clearly than your own child does? The next blow came from across the street. Mr. Harlan, my difficult neighbor, had been watching me for years with suspicious eyes. He knocked on my door one evening, his posture stiff, his mouth a tight line. "I've been contacted," he said flatly. "Your son's lawyer asked if I'd testify. They want me to say I've seen you acting strangely, forgetting things, talking to yourself." My breath caught. "And will you?" He hesitated, shifting on his feet. "I don't want trouble, but I did see you once standing in your yard at night muttering." I remembered the night after Sophia's phone call when I had whispered into the darkness that I would not be erased. He had mistaken my vow for madness. My voice shook, but I forced steel into it. "Mr. Harlan, I was not confused. I was reclaiming my life. If you twist that into weakness, then you will be helping them steal from me." He looked away, uncomfortable. I'll think about it." Then he left, his footsteps echoing like a warning. I sat alone, staring at the closed door. Their net was tightening. They were gathering witnesses, weaving lies out of scraps of truth. That night Noah called. His voice carried both caution and reassurance. "We'll counter it, Elizabeth. For every false witness we'll bring two who know the truth. But you must stay steady. Do not let their tactics shake you." I nodded into the empty room, whispering, "I will not bend." Because bending now meant breaking forever. The night before the first hearing, I gathered everything onto my dining table: the binder of receipts, the corrected statement from Dr. Patel, the evaluation from Dr. Myers, a letter from Eleanor ready to stand by me. Each piece was a stone in the wall I was building against them. I sat there in the dim glow of the kitchen light, the house silent except for the tick of the clock on the wall. My fingers brushed across the pages, and I thought of every sacrifice I had made: the meals, skipped the land, sold the nights, spent worrying instead of sleeping. All of it had led me here. I should have felt broken. Instead, I felt sharpened, like a blade that had been struck again and again until it could cut clean. As the hours slipped by, I closed my eyes and prayed not for Daniel and Sophia to fail, but for myself to stand strong. I prayed that when I faced them in court, I would not falter, that my voice would carry the truth louder than their lies. At dawn, I poured a cup of coffee and looked out the window. The sky was streaked with pale light, and for the first time in years, I felt ready. Tell me, if your own child dragged you into court to prove you unfit, would you crumble, or would you fight back with everything you had? Share your answer in the comments. Your courage might give strength to someone who feels alone tonight. Because I knew the time for whispers and hidden battles was over. The next step would not be taken in silence. It would be fought under oath before the eyes of the law. And when that day came, I would not bow. The courthouse was colder than I imagined, not in temperature but in spirit. Marble floors echoed every step, walls lined with portraits of judges stared down like silent witnesses. I walked beside Noah, my binder clutched in my arms like a shield. Inside the courtroom, Daniel and Sophia sat at the plaintiff's table, their lawyer leaning toward them, whispering. Daniel's eyes darted up and met mine for a second before sliding away. Sophia did not look at me at all. She sat upright, polished, confident, her expression smug as if she had already won. The judge, a stern man with silver hair, entered and called the session to order. His gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. Their lawyer rose first, his tone smooth, rehearsed. "Your Honor, this is a case about concern. My clients, Daniel and Sophia Carter, are here out of love, not greed. They have watched Mrs. Carter grow increasingly forgetful, confused, and vulnerable. They only wish to ensure her safety by obtaining guardianship of her finances." The words coiled through the air like snakes. Love, concern, safety, lies dressed in gentle clothing. I sat rigid, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Then Sophia took the stand. Her voice trembled just enough to sound sincere. "Elizabeth has been like a mother to me, but lately, she forgets things. She repeats herself. She called me twice in one night asking the same question. I'm terrified she'll lose everything she has." Her words sliced through me. That night she described, I remembered it. I had called twice, yes, once to confirm the rent, once to remind her of a doctor's appointment. Hardly confusion. But spun in her voice, it became evidence. The lawyer nodded, gravely feeding the illusion. "This is not malice, Your Honor. This is compassion." Compassion. I could almost taste the bitterness of it. Daniel took the stand next. My son, my own flesh and blood. He sat with his shoulders hunched, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Daniel, their lawyer, prompted gently, tell the court what you've noticed. He cleared his throat. My mom, she's not the same. She forgets to pay her own bills. She gets confused with dates. Sometimes she talks to herself at night. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. I clenched my fists beneath the table, my nails digging into my palms. Talking to myself. Yes, I had whispered into the night, but not in confusion, in defiance. And forgetting bills. The only bills I had touched in years were his and Sophia's. Still, his voice was steady, convincing, the words rehearsed. Each sentence felt like another stone laid on my chest. Then came Mr. Harlan. My neighbor shuffled to the stand, his eyes darting nervously. I've seen her outside late at night. She looked lost, like she didn't know where she was. The lawyer nodded solemnly. Thank you, Mr. Harlan. No further questions. I felt the weight of the room tilting against me, the lies piling higher, threatening to bury me alive. Noah leaned close, whispering, Hold steady. We'll dismantle this. When it was our turn, Noah stood tall, his voice calm but cutting. Your Honor, concern is commendable, but concern without truth is manipulation. Let us examine the facts. He motioned me to the stand. My knees trembled, but I walked forward, binder in hand. Every eye followed me, some pitying, some doubtful, some already convinced. I placed the binder before me and looked up at the judge. For a moment the silence stretched. Then I drew a deep breath and began. I opened the binder, its pages crisp beneath my trembling fingers. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. For 3 years, I managed not only my life but theirs. I paid their rent, their medical bills, even their car. Every receipt, every transfer is here. Does this look like confusion to you? The judge leaned forward as Noah handed him copies of the statements. The courtroom fell silent except for the rustle of paper. I continued, each word sharpening with conviction. They call me forgetful, but the truth is, I remembered everything for them. They call me confused, but the truth is, I kept track of every dollar that kept them afloat. Noah called Dr. Patel next. He adjusted his glasses nervously as he faced the judge. Months ago, Sophia asked me to sign a form suggesting Elizabeth struggled with her prescriptions. I signed without checking. That was a mistake. I've reviewed her records and she's always been precise. She manages her medication flawlessly. A murmur ran through the room. Sophia's jaw tightened, her eyes flashing. Then Eleanor took the stand. I've lived next door to Elizabeth for 15 years. I see her every day, gardening, reading, walking to church. She's sharp, independent, and kinder than most people I know. If anyone is confused here, it's those who think she cannot care for herself. Her words wrapped around me like a blanket, warm and steady. For the first time, I felt the scales tipping back. Noah rose again, his tone firm. And finally, Your Honor, we submit an independent medical evaluation from Dr. Myers, a licensed specialist. His conclusion, Mrs. Carter's cognitive function is above average for her age. There is no evidence of decline. Gasps rippled through the room. I looked across the aisle. Sophia's confidence cracked, her painted mask slipping. The judge set the papers down, his expression unreadable. For a moment the courtroom held its breath. Then he turned back to Daniel and Sophia's lawyer. Do you have a response to this evidence? The lawyer rose, his face tight. Your Honor, memory tests can be deceiving. A single evaluation. The judge cut him off with a raised hand. I've heard enough. His voice carried across the room like thunder. This court is not here to reward manipulation disguised as concern. I felt my breath catch. Sophia gripped Daniel's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. Her perfect composure shattered her whisper, hissing across the room. You promised this would work. Daniel's face was pale, his eyes refusing to meet mine. The judge continued, his gaze sharp. Mrs. Carter has presented clear financial records, credible witnesses, and a professional evaluation. The claims of confusion are not supported by evidence. Until I deliver my final ruling, the request for guardianship is denied. The gavel struck once, echoing like a heartbeat of justice. I exhaled slowly, relief flooding me. For the first time in months, I felt seen, not as weak, not as confused, but as myself. Still, I knew this battle was not over. Sophia's eyes burned into me as the court adjourned, promising retaliation without words. Tell me if you stood where I did, accused, betrayed, nearly stripped of your life. Would you have found the strength to fight back? Share your answer in the comments. Your story could help another soul stand tall. Because though I had won this round, the war was not yet finished. The final blow, the true judgment, was still to come. The second hearing came faster than I expected. My binder had grown heavier with new affidavits, but my heart felt lighter. This time I was not walking into the unknown. I was walking into a battlefield prepared. The courtroom filled with the low murmur of voices. Daniel sat stiffly beside Sophia, who whispered furiously in his ear. Their lawyer shuffled papers, his confidence dimmed but not gone. Across the aisle, Noah rested a steady hand on my shoulder. "Remember," he whispered, "truth is on our side." The judge entered, his gavel striking once. Silence blanketed the room. "Proceed," he said. Their lawyer rose, but his words carried less certainty now. He repeated claims of confusion, forgetfulness, concern for my well-being. But each phrase sounded thinner, like fabric stretched too far. Then it was our turn. Noah stood tall, his voice clear and unwavering. "Your Honor, my client has already proven her competence through records, witnesses, and medical evaluation. Today we present further evidence of manipulation." He placed a small recorder on the table. My stomach tightened as the tape played. Sophia's voice filled the courtroom, sharp and careless, recorded during that so-called reconciliation dinner. "We counted on her money to cover the contract. Without it, we're drowning." Gasps rippled through the room. Sophia's face drained of color, her lips parting in shock. Daniel looked down, shame painting his cheeks. I sat very still, my heart pounding. It was no longer just my word against theirs. It was their own voices condemning them. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the judge striking his gavel twice. "Order," he commanded, his voice booming. Silence fell again, heavy and suffocating. Sophia clutched Daniel's arm, her eyes darting wildly. "That recording, it's taken out of context," she blurted, her voice trembling. But Noah was ready. "Context, Your Honor. The context is clear: financial dependence disguised as family loyalty. They weren't worried about Elizabeth's safety. They were worried about losing her money." The judge turned his gaze toward Daniel. "Mr. Carter, do you deny these words?" Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. His throat bobbed as if the truth itself had lodged there, choking him. Finally, he muttered, I don't remember. Lies. Weak lies falling flat against the echo of Sophia's recorded voice. Noah pressed forward. "Your Honor, my client has endured not only financial exploitation but also emotional abuse. To be excluded from her own son's wedding after financing their lives, that is not forgetfulness on her part, that is cruelty on theirs." Every eye in the room turned to me. I sat straighter, letting the silence settle before I spoke. "I am not confused. I am not broken. I gave out of love and they turned it into chains. I will not wear them any longer." My words rang through the chamber, quiet but fierce, like a blade cutting clean. The judge leaned back, his fingers steepled. He studied me for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Very well," he said. "I will deliver my ruling." The judge's voice cut through the silence, deliberate and steady. "This court recognizes the seriousness of these proceedings. To strip an individual of her autonomy is no small matter. It requires undeniable proof of incompetence." He paused, his eyes sweeping the room, resting briefly on me before shifting to Daniel and Sophia. "What I have seen instead is a woman who has demonstrated clarity, responsibility, and foresight. Mrs. Carter has provided financial records, medical evaluations, and credible witnesses. These are not the actions of a confused mind. These are the actions of a capable one." A tremor ran through me, though I kept my face composed. The judge continued, his tone sharper now. "What troubles this court is not Mrs. Carter's capacity, but the behavior of those who claim to act in her best interest. Manipulation, exploitation, attempts to misuse the law for personal gain." Sophia shifted in her seat, her face pale, her fingers twisting together. Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the table, his jaw clenched tight. Noah stood beside me, his chin high, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. We were so close, yet until the gavel struck, nothing was certain. The judge reached for his papers. "Therefore, it is the ruling of this court." My breath caught. Every muscle in my body tightened, waiting for the words that would decide whether I remained free or became a prisoner in my own life. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp as thunder. "This court denies the petition for guardianship. Mrs. Carter retains full control over her finances and personal affairs. Furthermore, I warn the plaintiffs, should there be further attempts to harass or exploit this court, will not hesitate to impose sanctions." For a moment the words did not register. They floated in the air, heavy and final, until they sank into me like light breaking through clouds. I had won. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Noah placed a steady hand on my shoulder, his voice low but firm. "You did it, Elizabeth. You stood your ground." I turned my gaze toward Daniel. My son sat, slumped, shame carved into his face. Sophia, however, burned with silent fury, her eyes narrow, her lips pressed thin. She looked at me as if promising this was not the end. I rose slowly, my legs trembling but strong enough to carry me. For months I had been dragged through lies, humiliated, accused of weakness. And yet here I stood, vindicated. As I walked out of the courtroom, the autumn sun met me on the steps, warm against my face. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift. I was free not because they had given me freedom, but because I had taken it back. Tell me, if you were stripped down by lies in front of the world, would you have found the strength to fight until the end? Share your answer in the comments. Your story could be the light another person needs tonight. Because while the court had spoken, the scars of betrayal still ran deep. The law had given me justice, but my heart was left to grapple with the loss of the boy I once called my son. And so began the hardest part, not the fight in court, but the fight to rebuild my life. 3 weeks after the judge's gavel fell, I woke to a morning that felt different. The air drifting through my curtains was softer, almost gentle, carrying with it the promise of change. For the first time in years, I was not waking up to anxiety. I was waking up to possibility. I walked through my house slowly, touching the edges of furniture, the cool surface of the kitchen table, the piano keys gathering dust. These walls had seen my sacrifices, my grief, my battles. Now they would see my rebirth. The first change I made was simple but profound. I repainted the kitchen. Gone was the dull beige Sophia once criticized as outdated. I chose a pale yellow, warm and bright, a color that reminded me of morning sunlight. As I brushed stroke after stroke, I felt as though I were painting over more than walls. I was painting over years of silence, of erasure, of living only for others. Eleanor stopped by one afternoon, her eyes widening at the new brightness. "Elizabeth, it's like your house is smiling again." Her words made me laugh, a sound I had not heard from myself in too long. In the evenings I sat at my table, not with bills or letters from lawyers, but with novels I had set aside long ago. I reopened pages I once shared with my husband, his memory walking beside me as the words carried me away. Have you ever returned to something you once loved and felt as if a missing piece of yourself had been restored? That was what I felt with every page I turned. For the first time in years, the silence of my home was no longer heavy. It was alive. The garden was next. For too long, my roses had been left to wither, their petals curled and brown, their stems choked by weeds. One Saturday morning, I pulled on my gloves and knelt in the dirt. The earth was cool beneath my fingers, and the smell of soil filled the air. As I dug, trimmed, and watered, I remembered the afternoons I once spent there with my husband. He used to say, "A garden reflects its keeper. If you care for it, it blooms. If you neglect it, it withers." Looking at the roses now, I realized he had not only been talking about flowers, he had been talking about me. By the time the sun began to set, tiny buds peeked out from the soil, fragile but determined. I brushed the dirt from my hands and smiled. My garden would bloom again. So would I. A few days later, I visited the library. I signed my name on the sheet for the afternoon book club, something I had long dreamed of but never dared. The room smelled of paper and coffee, filled with voices eager to discuss stories. For once, I was not the provider, the rescuer, or the accused. I was simply a woman with a book in her hand and a mind ready to share. When it was my turn to speak, my voice shook at first, but then words poured out steady and clear. The others nodded, listened, and smiled. I was not invisible. I belonged. Have you ever stepped into a room and realized you did not have to prove yourself to anyone? You only had to be yourself? That was the gift the library gave me. That night, as I walked home under the streetlights, I felt a quiet joy rising in me, small but certain, like the buds in my garden waiting to bloom. One evening, I lifted the heavy cover from my old piano. The keys were yellowed, some slightly out of tune, but they called to me like an old friend. I sat down, my fingers hovering uncertainly above them. At first the sound was clumsy, broken notes stumbling into one another, but as I kept playing, muscle memory returned. A melody began to form, soft, trembling, then steady. Tears blurred my vision. This piano had once filled the house with laughter, my husband humming along, Daniel falling asleep on the rug to its gentle rhythms. Now the music belonged to me alone. Yet instead of sorrow, I felt a swell of peace. The piano did not judge. It welcomed me back. In that moment I realized something profound. I had not lost everything. Pieces of joy still lived inside me, waiting for me to claim them again. The next week I booked a short trip to the coast. Just 2 days, nothing extravagant. Standing at the shoreline, I felt the salt wind against my skin, the crash of waves steady like a heartbeat. I bent down and picked up a seashell, small and imperfect, its edges chipped. I held it to my ear, listening to the whisper of the ocean inside. I thought of myself chipped, weathered, but still carrying something vast within. On the drive home, the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of gold and violet. I whispered aloud, I am still here, and I am enough. Have you ever stood before the sea and felt both small and infinite at the same time? That was how I felt, fragile yet unbreakable. Back at home, I poured myself a cup of tea and stepped onto the porch. The garden, once withered, now stirred with new life. Buds pressed against the evening air, ready to bloom. The pale yellow walls of my kitchen glowed through the window, warm and inviting. Music from the piano still lingered faintly in the house like an echo of hope. I sat in my chair and let the silence wrap around me, not as a weight but as a companion. For years, silence had meant abandonment. Now it meant freedom. My phone buzzed once. A message from Daniel. Just 2 words, I'm sorry. I stared at the screen, my heart tightening. Once I would have rushed to forgive, to explain away the hurt, to hand him another piece of myself. But not this time. I placed the phone face down on the table. His apology was not a bridge, it was a reminder of the fire I had walked through. I chose instead to lift my teacup, breathing in the steam, tasting the quiet victory of survival. Tell me, if the ones who hurt you came back with apologies after tearing you apart, would you open your door again, or would you keep it closed to protect your peace? Share your answer in the comments. Someone out there may need your wisdom tonight. As the stars blinked awake in the sky, I whispered to myself, this is my life now. My choice. My peace. But even in peace, I knew the story was not fully over. Betrayal leaves scars that never fade. The question was no longer whether I would survive. It was whether I could truly forgive, or if letting go was the only way forward. 3 months after the verdict, I stood in my new apartment, a modest place near the heart of the city. The walls were fresh white, the windows wide, letting in streams of light that bathed the room in warmth. Outside, I could hear the faint bustle of life, children laughing, buses, hissing footsteps echoing on sidewalks. It was a sound I had not heard in years, a sound of belonging. I had left the old house behind. Not because it held no value, but because it held too many ghosts. Every corner whispered of sacrifices made, of demands, answered of nights spent alone while my money paid for their comfort. It was time to begin again. Each morning I walked to the corner cafe, a book tucked under my arm. The barista learned my name quickly, greeting me with a smile. Sometimes I lingered at the window, sipping coffee while the city moved around me, anonymous yet alive. In the afternoons I volunteered at the community center. I read to children whose parents worked late, their wide eyes fixed on the stories spilling from my lips. Their laughter reminded me of Daniel as a boy before greed clouded his gaze. At night I wrote letters to myself. Not journals of pain, but reminders of strength. Elizabeth, you are worthy. Elizabeth, you are free. Elizabeth, you have survived. Have you ever spoken to yourself as if you were your own dearest friend? It changes everything. Each word I wrote became a thread in the new fabric of my life, weaving something stronger than what had been torn. One weekend I joined a group trip organized by the community center. We boarded a bus headed toward the mountains, and for the first time in decades I felt like a traveler instead of a caretaker. The winding roads led us to a valley where the air was crisp, the grass thick with dew, and the sky stretched wide and endless. I walked along a trail, my steps slow but steady, my breath mingling with the scent of pine. The world around me was vast, yet I felt small in the best way possible. I was no longer trapped in a life defined by obligation. I was part of something larger, alive, unbound, free. That night we gathered around a fire. The flames crackled, sparks rising into the starry sky. A woman sitting beside me turned and asked softly, "Why did you come on this trip?" I hesitated, then answered with honesty, "Because I finally had the chance to. Because for too long my life was spent financing others and I forgot how to live for myself." She nodded, her eyes shining in the glow of the fire. "Then, this is your beginning." Her words settled into me warm and sure. A beginning that was exactly what it was. On the bus ride home, I looked out at the horizon, painted gold by the setting sun. I thought of the past, not with anger but with clarity. My story had been scarred by betrayal, but those scars had not broken me. They had carved me into someone new. Have you ever looked at your scars and realized they were not signs of weakness but of survival? That is what I carried home with me that night. Back in the city, I found myself building new rituals. On Sundays, I walked to the farmer's market, basket in hand, filling it with fresh bread, apples, and flowers. Each purchase felt like a gift to myself, something I had rarely allowed before. I met people there too, vendors who remembered my name, neighbors who smiled in greeting. Slowly, the loneliness that once wrapped itself around me began to unravel thread by thread. In the evenings, I lit a candle and played the piano. My fingers moved with more confidence now, each note carrying me further from the shadows of the past. The music filled the room not as background but as a declaration I was alive. Sometimes, late at night, I would step onto my balcony. The city lights shimmered below a sea of windows glowing against the dark. I thought of Daniel then, my son, my only child. His absence still hurt, a hollow ache that no verdict could erase. But I also knew this truth: I had survived without his approval, and I could continue to do so. Forgiveness hovered at the edges of my mind, uncertain, fragile. Was I ready? Not yet, maybe not ever. But letting go of the chains did not require forgiveness. It required choosing peace. And peace was what I was finally learning to hold. Have you ever realized that healing is not about erasing pain, but about building something stronger beside it? That was the lesson I carried into every quiet night. On the first day of spring, I took a train to the coast. The ride was long, but the view outside the window unfolded like a promise: fields turning green, rivers glinting in the sunlight, the horizon stretching wide and endless. When I stepped onto the sand, the wind wrapped around me, cool and salty. Waves crashed against the shore, steady and eternal, as though they had been waiting to greet me. I walked barefoot along the edge, the cold water rushing over my feet, washing away more than just the dust of travel. I thought of the journey behind me, of the sacrifices that had once defined me, the betrayal that had nearly broken me, the courtroom where I fought for my freedom. And I thought of the journey ahead, filled not with fear but with choice. I bent down, picked up a seashell, and held it close. Its edges were rough, its surface worn, yet inside it still carried the echo of the sea. I smiled because I understood. I, too, carried echoes of pain. But I also carried the sound of survival. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I wrote in my notebook, "I am not invisible. I am not broken. I am free." Tell me, if you had walked through betrayal, through loss, through a fight for your very dignity, what words would you write to yourself? Share them in the comments. Your voice may become the strength someone else needs tonight. As the waves rolled in and the stars appeared, I whispered to the ocean, to myself, to anyone listening, this is not the end. This is the beginning.